The story begins with a young boy named Haruto going somewhere while his childhood friend MIHARU cries and begs him not to leave. It turns out to be a flashback of Haruto's memories which he reminisces while riding a bus. Suddenly, a train runs into the bus and Haruto is tragically killed with the rest of the passengers. Waking up in a dark room, Haruto opens his eyes to find himself in the body of a young malnourished boy. He's perplexed because his memories get mixed up and he's not sure if he's still Haruto, the young man from Japan, or if he's the wretched-looking boy. While he's still wondering if a fever is messing with his mind, a group of men enters the room. The men come in with food and address him by the name Ryo. They begin munching on the food but don't give the starving Ryo any. To make things worse, they lament that he stinks and his stench is affecting the taste of their food. After they send him out to take a bath, the hungry Ryo is more concerned with finding food, so he searches for some berries in the bushes to eat. While looking through the bushes, Haruto's memories run through his mind and he remembers he was a 20-year-old student from Japan. Despite the flashbacks, Haruto forces himself to forget the memories because he's now Ryo, a poor boy living in the slums of the kingdom of BELTRUM. Now accepting that he's Ryo, he decides to focus on his mission to avenge his mother who was murdered by an unknown man. He remembers how he lived with his mother in a small house and how she told them they were immigrants from a land where everyone has dark hair. Ryo is drawn out of his thoughts when 4 people in white robes approach him to ask him if he saw a girl with purple hair. Initially, he's intimidated by them, but then the white-haired girl among them introduces herself as Celia and asks him more politely. Ryo then tells them that he hasn't seen her, and then Celia casts a spell to detect nearby magic users. She then notices that Ryo possesses a lot of magic power. Although they're unable to find the girl, Celia gives Ryo a bag of coins to thank him for his help before leaving. After hiding the bag of coins in his clothes, Ryo returns to the house he woke up in, but is immediately attacked by a masked man. Thankfully, the assailant's knife hits the bag of coins, so Ryo is unharmed. However, he prepares to continue his attack, but suddenly, time stops and the ethereal projection of a pink-haired girl appears to him. She touches his cheeks and teaches him how to use his magic abilities. Ryo begins emitting a magical aura, and as time continues, he combines Haruto's memories of martial arts with his new powers. Using the knowledge the pink-haired girl gave him, he casts a spell to enhance his physical abilities and knocks out the masked man. After defeating the man, he hears noises coming from a bag in the room and finds a purple-haired girl inside it. She asks him to take her to the royal castle, but suddenly faints when she sees the unconscious masked man. Ryo decides to take her to the castle, but he gets spotted by the people in robes from earlier. They assume that he's one of the kidnappers and take him to the castle for interrogation. Meanwhile, back in the house where Ryo was attacked, royal guards inspect the place and find the masked man who's regained consciousness, but before they can question him, a mysterious hooded man watching from afar crushes a red crystal which causes the suspect to die, foaming at the mouth. In a dungeon under the castle, Ryo is tortured severely by Charles, a vice-captain of the Knights. Charles wants Ryo to admit that he's one of the princess's abductors, but he insists that he's innocent. A while later, the purple-haired girl, who is the princess named FLORA, wakes up in her room. Celia and a pink-haired woman named VANESSA, who was watching over her, tell her what happened while she was unconscious. Immediately, Princess FLORA asks to see Ryo, so they take her to the dungeon. Entering the dungeon, Celia and VANESSA are horrified to see what Charles had done to the young Ryo. FLORA then explains that he's innocent and was the one who saved her from the abductors. She then rushes to Ryo after asking Charles to set him free. Using her special magical abilities, Celia heals Ryo's wounds and he passes out. Later, Ryo wakes up in one of the palace rooms and Celia apologizes to him for what the royal guards had done to him. She also tells him that the king would like to thank him for saving Princess FLORA. In the royal throne room, the king sits with the queen and his 2 daughters, Princess FLORA and Christina. A while later, Ryo is brought before them with a nice haircut and nice clothes after being cleaned up. The king then thanks him for saving Princess FLORA and decides to show his gratitude by allowing him to attend the BELTRUM Royal Academy. Ryo accepts the offer and gets enrolled in the primary school. However, when Celia, who is a teacher in the school, introduces him to the other students in his class, Ryo immediately feels out of place because the nobles make fun of him for being a commoner. After school, Ryo visits Celia at her research lab and asks her to teach him how to read and write. Celia then reveals that she's only 12 years old but skipped all the grades until she graduated because she was so brilliant. While tutoring Ryo, Celia notices that he gets all the answers in the assignment correctly, so she is pushed to tell him that Princess Christina is the only other person in the class that got all the answers correct. After the lesson, Celia gives him some children's novels to read so he can improve. Sometime later, Ryo's class takes part in combat lessons and sword fighting. The students use wooden swords to spar with each other, and Ryo uses the knowledge of martial arts he gained as Haruto in his past life to ace the tests, and he even impresses the instructor. After seeing his display of excellent swordsmanship, the instructor offers him a chance to join the Royal Knights, but he politely declines it. One day, Ryo begins to recall memories from Haruto's life and even remembers his childhood friend MIHARU. He gets angry with himself for dwelling on Haruto's problems and decides to focus on his new life and move on. 5 years later, Ryo gets chosen to represent the BELTRUM Royal Academy in a tournament against the Royal Guards. However, another student named Alphonse is not happy with the selection and claims that Ryo shouldn't get the slot because he's a peasant. At school, Ryo helps Celia in the library, and she commends him for his tremendous progress since he enrolled in the academy 5 years back. He responds by teasing her about how she hasn't grown since they first met. Later, the two have tea and Ryo reveals that he would like to travel to his parents' homeland in the UZUMA region after graduation, especially because of how badly he's treated by other students. Sometime later, the exhibition tournament between BELTRUM Royal Academy and the Royal Guards commences. Alfred, the referee, begins the first match, which is between Ryo and Charles, the vice-captain of the guards who tortured him 5 years ago. Charles attempts to intimidate Ryo by mocking him, but he is unfazed and prepares to have the revenge. The duel begins and the two fight intensely, clashing their wooden swords and using all the skills at their disposal. Ryo counters all of Charles' attacks, and this pushes him to fight with anger. He charges at Ryo, giving everything he's got, desperate to win. However, Ryo gets the upper hand and knocks his sword out of his hands, defeating him. Charles reluctantly accepts defeat and leaves in disappointment. Later that night, Charles laments to an ominous blue-haired man as they drink together. The guest is the ambassador from the Proxia Empire, and when Charles tells him that Ryo was involved when Flora was abducted 5 years ago, the guest gets interested. It turns out that the guy is the hooded figure who killed the masked assailant by crushing a red crystal. One day in class, Celia teaches the class about magic and asks them to cast a spell to create a sphere of light. While attempting it, the other royal students mock Ryo for not being able to, even though everyone else has mastered it. For some reason, Ryo can't use the same type of magic they have, but possesses a special kind of magic different from theirs. Ryo doesn't fully understand his abilities, and he hides them from everyone so they don't get him any unnecessary attention. After class, Ryo gets accused of seducing the female students by another royal student named Stuart. However, Celia immediately intervenes to defend Ryo, so Stuart leaves him alone but warns him not to anger him because he's from the powerful house of Huguenot. Later, the students go outside for a practical lesson. They must work as a team to reach a goal by passing through the mountain forests. Alphonse serves as the leader of the team and leads them through the forest. He makes Ryo carry the group members' bags and claims it's because Ryo doesn't have any magic and wouldn't be useful in fighting monsters, but it's quite obvious it's because he just doesn't like him. Regardless, Ryo accepts the job and the group begins their journey. Along the way, they encounter a horde of goblins. The boys enhance their physical abilities with magic, so they can fight the goblins. After a short battle, the group is victorious, so they continue along the path, but somewhere in the shadows, the ambassador from Proxia is keeping tabs on Ryo and intends to test the young boy's abilities. He's developed an interest in Ryo and also believes that he possesses a special kind of magic called spirit magic. Soon, the group reaches the end of the path and the students find themselves on the edge of a cliff. Suddenly, they're ambushed by huge orcs with spears. When Stuart gets injured by one of the spears, he trips and accidentally pushes Flora off the cliff. Thankfully, Ryo notices just in time and jumps down to save her. He catches her and pushes her back onto the cliff, but he plummets down below. Back on the cliff, Alphonse guides the team and they manage to defeat the orcs. Afterward, the students accuse Stuart of pushing Flora, but he lies, stating that Ryo pushed him. Flora immediately defends Ryo, but the other students believe Stuart. Suddenly, they're attacked by a huge minotaur, and when they realize they can't beat it, most of them run away, but Flora stays back to heal the injured students. While doing so, the minotaur tries to attack her, but Ryo returns and cuts off the beast's arm. He asks Flora to escape with the others before resuming his battle. Eventually, he defeats it by decapitating it, but then runs away before the other students can see him because they all believe that he pushed Flora down the cliff. Days after the incident in the forest, Ryo is nowhere to be found and has been assumed to be missing. At the school, Celia overhears Duke Huguenot. Stuart's father decides to publicly announce that Ryo pushed Princess Flora off the cliff, even though he knows it was Stuart who did it. Later, Ryo discreetly visits Celia in her lab, and she's relieved to see that he's okay. She tells him about the Duke's plot and is enraged by it, but Ryo is not bothered by it and tells her that nobody would believe him. To save himself from further problems, he decides to travel to the UZUMA region, where his ancestors lived, and promises Celia that they'll meet again. Afterward, he leaves, but Celia is heartbroken because it seems she has fallen in love with him. After traveling for 3 days, Ryo reaches the kingdom of Galark. He gets to a market town and decides to get some food, unaware that someone is following him. Ryo leaves the town when he is done buying the food and condiments to continue his journey through the forest. Somewhere in the forest, he comes across a beast girl that looks to be unconscious. He approaches her, but she suddenly wakes up and spits a poison spike at him. Ryo kicks her away and his vision begins to get blurry from the toxin, but he notices that she has animal ears. He then concludes that she is a beast girl and uses his magic to neutralize the poison. Seeing this, the girl declares that she's going to kill him and begins attacking him with her knives, but he manages to pin her to the ground. As she struggles on the ground, Ryo calms her down with a spell that makes her fall asleep. Ryo notices that she has a cooler of submission on her neck, so he uses a magic spell he learned from a book he read to get it off. In a flashback, it is revealed that the Beast Girl's name is LATIFA, and that she died in the same train accident as Haruto. She got transported to the same fantasy world, but got reincarnated as a Beast Girl, and then captured by the Huguenot family. She was trapped in a dungeon where Stuart would treat her cruelly every day. LATIFA soon wakes up, and Ryo tells her that he took off the collar of submission, which makes her thank him with tears of joy. She explains that she doesn't know anything about her master except Stuart's name. Ryo immediately concludes that it's the same Stuart from the Royal Academy, and that LATIFA was sent to kill him by the House of Huguenot. After LATIFA tells him she will try to kill him anymore, he sets her free from her restraints, but she asks to follow him on his journey since he's also headed east, which leads to a place called the Wilderness, where beast people and demi-humans live together in peace. Ryo agrees, and the two continue the journey on which they have dangerous adventures. One night, LATIFA starts talking in her sleep about her parents in Tokyo. After listening to her, Ryo realizes that she died in the same accident as him but decides not to say anything about it. Some nights later, LATIFA is having nightmares, so Ryo calms her down with a magic spell and notices that the fire outside their camp suddenly went out. Going out to investigate, he sees a large wolf that suddenly disappears into a blinding ray of light. He then uses his magic to detect 3 demi-humans around the hut. 2 of them find LATIFA sleeping and discover that she was put to sleep using spirit magic. As a result, they conclude that he kidnapped her, and so the one named UZUMA attacks him with a powerful magic blast, and he passes out. Ryo wakes up later to find that he's tied to a bed by the demi-humans. Suddenly, LATIFA wakes up and rushes to check on Ryo when she realizes what happened. Realizing their mistake, the demi-human girls apologize to Ryo for capturing him as they remove his restraints. An old lady among them named Ursula also apologizes to him and tells him that he can stay in the room to recover. The next morning, Ryo wakes in the village where the demi-humans took him to, and their leader, Ursula, shows him around the place. She takes him to a huge tree that they call the Ward Tree, where DRYAS, the spirit of mighty trees, resides. Afterward, she takes him to a conference room where he meets a dwarf named DOMINIC and an elf named DORA waiting for him. In the meeting, the elders apologize for the earlier misunderstanding and thank him for saving LATIFA from slavery. As a show of their gratitude, they ask him what he would like from them in exchange, so Ryo asks them to let him stay in the village and also teach him about the spirit arts and the traditions of the village. They gladly accept his requests, and suddenly a green-haired girl appears to them, levitating. Ryo soon discovers that she is DRYAS, the spirit of the World Tree. DRYAS senses a spirit inside Ryo and presumes that he made a contract with it. However, Ryo doesn't remember anything of that sort, but then DRYAS touches his face and confirms that he has an insane amount of magical energy inside him. She then tells him that he has that much power because there is a spirit sleeping inside him. Later, Orphan takes Ryo to a house where LATIFA and the other demi-human girls are waiting for him. They all have dinner together, and afterward, a cat girl named Seirei tells Ryo and LATIFA that they'll be staying with her, Orphan, and another demi-human girl named Alma. As time goes on, the people of the village teach Ryo the spirit arts and combat while getting more familiar with them and helping them with everyday tasks. Elsewhere, the ambassador from Proxia, whose name is revealed to be Reese, rides a griffin with a blonde-haired young man to the entrance of a cave. Getting there, Reese goes into the cave while the young man waits outside. A short while later, Reese emerges from the cave with a huge wyvern egg and hands it to the young man. The two then continue their journey with the egg, riding their griffin. A year has passed since Ryo settled in the forest village, and a feast is being prepared for the night of the Grand Spirit Festival. While Ryo and the villagers enjoy the feast and have fun together, Reese and the young man arrive somewhere in a forest to rest for the night. Reese gives the man a red pill and tells him to swallow it. He claims that if he does, he'll allow him to know where he is at all times. The young man swallows it without hesitation, and then Reese goes out to inspect the area, leaving him to watch over the egg. Back in the forest village, Ryo takes LATIFA for a while into the forest. During the stroll, he tells her that his time in the village is coming to an end. Ryo explains that he would like to continue his journey to the land of his ancestors soon, and that means he'd have to leave them. LATIFA tells him that she wants to follow him, but he refuses, telling her that he doesn't know how dangerous the rest of his journey is, and so he doesn't want to put her in harm's way. However, LATIFA isn't having any of it and instantly gets upset because she doesn't want to be separated from him. Ryo tries to calm her down, but she just runs away from him in tears. Meanwhile, in the village, the elders call for a meeting because they sensed a large swarm of wyverns flying in their direction. Back in the wyvern cave, Reese begins stealing all the remaining eggs and transports them elsewhere. While flying in the air, the demi-humans spot the blonde boy somewhere in the forests and decide to investigate. They approach him so they can find out what he's doing there, but he gets intimidated by them and escapes on the griffin. As he flies away, the wyverns suddenly start chasing after him, and Seirei notices that they're headed in the direction of the village. Back in the cave, Reese has successfully transported all the eggs out and then brings out a red stone similar to the one he made the young boy swallow. He crushes the stone, and just as he does that, the man dies in the air, spitting blood and falling off the griffin. Still flying in the air, Sarah summons a spirit wolf and Alma rides it. Meanwhile, on the ground, heartbroken Latifa is wandering through the forest, and suddenly, the wyvern egg that the young man dropped falls to the ground and breaks right in front of her. Following the egg, the largest wyvern lands before Latifa, who is now extremely terrified. The enraged beast attempts to kill Latifa with a massive fireball from its mouth, but Alma arrives to save her. She then summons a large lion spirit that joins the wolf to attack the wyvern. Despite their strongest attacks, the lion and wolf are unable to defeat the wyvern, so Latifa distracts it so Anicap attack it. However, she gets trapped, and just when she's about to be attacked by the giant beast, Rio appears and saves her. After flying her to safety, Rio uses his magic to enhance his powers and takes on the wyvern with nothing but fists and feet. The wyvern then attempts to unleash a powerful fiery attack on Rio, but he counters it by conjuring a large ball of energy which he shoots into its mouth, killing it. With the largest wyvern defeated, the others retreat, and the demi-humans are all astonished by how easily Rio killed the most powerful wyvern. The next day, Latifa finally accepts that Rio is leaving, so she reveals that she was once a human in Japan, but died and reincarnated into this fantasy world. Rio already knew this, but just tells her that he too was reincarnated into the realm. Sometime later, Rio bids farewell to the elders and villagers. As a parting gift, Dominic gives him a mithril sword to channel his spirit magic and a black suit of armor made from wyvern skin. The elves give him potions and medicines, while the beast people give him food and supplies. Finally, Sildora gives him a magical storage device that he can use to keep all his gifts during his travels. Rio thanks them all and promises to return to save them if they ever need his help before saying his final heartfelt goodbye to Latifa and leaving. 2 weeks after arriving in the Yaguma region, Rio still hasn't found any information about his parents. Sometime later, he arrives in the village of KARASUKI, where he is directed to the chief, who is an old woman named Yuba. When he gets an audience with her, he asks her about his father Zen and his mother Ayame. The moment he calls the names, Yuma recognizes them and reveals some shocking information to him. It turns out that Yuba is Rio's grandmother, Zen's mother, and she proves it to him when she takes him to the graves built for his parents. Rio bows down before the graves to pay his respects, and Yuba tells him that his parents had to leave the village many years ago for a reason she can't disclose to him yet. She then asks him to stay with her in the village until she's ready to tell him, and Rio accepts the terms. Back in Yuba's home, Rio finds out that she lives with a girl named RURI, who happens to be his cousin. The following day, Rio gets settled in and begins helping with chores around the house. In the process, he discovers that both Yuba and RURI can use spirit magic just like him. Later in the afternoon, Ruri's friend Sayo and her brother named Shin come over for lunch. Afterward, Shin takes Rio hunting in a forest where they help a hunter named Dola. After many attempts, Shin doesn't make a single catch, but Rio turns out to be a hunting prodigy as he excels on his first try. Sure enough, Shin gets jealous when he notices this. As time goes on, Rio gets more familiar with the villagers and helps them out with many different tasks. In a short time, he becomes very popular and well-liked by the people of KARASUKI. One day, Yuba calls him and asks for a favor from him. She asks him to escort the traders who are traveling to the royal capital where they're going to sell rice. Rio agrees, but suddenly their attention is drawn to loud arguments between Shin and an arrogant man named Gon. Gon is the son of the leader of a nearby village and demands to stay in Yuba's house while his cart for transporting goods to the capital is undergoing repairs. In the heat of the argument, Gon declares that he would one day marry RURI because she's Yuba's only heir. This statement pushes Shin to lose it and attack Gon. He swings a punch at Gon, but unfortunately, his efforts prove futile because he's quickly overpowered by the big guy. Gon subdues Shin and grabs him by the neck, choking him. However, before Gon can do any serious damage to Shin, Yuba arrives and breaks up the very one-sided fight. The elderly leader decides to disregard the incident, assuming it was a misunderstanding, and allows Gon to stay in a guest house until his cart is repaired. To keep her safe from Gon, Yuba allows Sayo to stay in her house. Later that night, Rio meets with RURI and gives her a red stone. He tells her it's a protective amulet and asks her to keep it in a corner of her room. Elsewhere in the guest house, Gon hangs out with his slacker friends while drinking. They chat, and it turns out that the cart wasn't damaged by accident. They had intentionally broken it so that they would have an excuse to stay in KARASUKI village while plotting a wicked scheme. The following day, a man arrives riding a horse. The man appears to be very kind and introduces himself as a tax examiner named Hayate. Along with 2 of his helpers, Hayate examines the villagers' crops, and afterward, Yuba hosts him in her house where he has dinner. Later that night, Gon sneaks into RURI and Sayo's room. While the girls are sleeping, he attempts to execute his nefarious plan but stops when he sees Rio entering the room. Rio had sensed his presence in the building thanks to the protective amulet he gave RURI earlier. Without hesitation, Rio grabs Gon and gives him a serious beating, and it's not just because he invaded the girl's room. Unfortunately for Gon, he also reminds Ryo of the man who killed his mother, and so he has even more motivation to pummel him mercilessly. Ryo punches Gon so hard that he almost kills him, but Hayate arrives in the room just in time to stop him. While using his magic to heal Gon's severe injuries, Hayate assures Ryo that he'll take the invader to a prison camp the next day. After that, Ryo goes outside to spend time alone, and as he gets lost in thought, he realizes how he completely forgot about his mission to avenge his mother. He thinks about how his life changed drastically ever since Haruto's memories and personality got mixed up with his, and how he could have killed Gon, but Haruto suppressed his darker thoughts. The next day, Ryo apologizes to everyone for his violent behavior the previous night, but instead of getting scolded, everyone thanks him for saving the girls who were in a very vulnerable position. As promised, after saying his goodbyes, Hayate takes Gon and his goons and places them in the back of a cart to be transported to the prison camp. Before Hayate leaves, Yuba calls him to give him a letter to deliver to his father, Lord GOUKI. At the same time, Shin, Dola, Seo, and Ryo set off on their journey to the royal capital where they will sell their rice. After traveling for a few days, they arrive at the royal capital and find a place to stay for a while. While the others stay back, Dola takes Shin and Ryo to a restaurant for drinks. After having a few drinks, they exit the place, and Shin personally thanks Ryo for saving his sister from Gon the other night. Shortly after, Shin decides to take Seo to the market and offers to buy her something nice to thank her for helping take good care of him since they first met. When they get to the market, Seo picks out a hair decoration, so Ryo buys it for her. Its kind gesture causes Seo to realize that she may have developed strong feelings for Ryo, and she wonders if she's in love with him. Elsewhere, Hayate arrives at a large house and gives his father, Lord GOUKI, the letter that Yuba gave him before he left the village. A wave of surprise washes over GOUKI's face as he reads the letter. Sometime later, GOUKI finds Ryo and invites him to his house. It turns out that GOUKI and his wife, KAYOKO, once served as attendants to Ryo's mother, AYAME, who was once the daughter of the royal family of KARASUKI. 20 years ago, the kingdom of KARASUKI was at war with the Rokurin kingdom. As a result, Ryo's father, Zen, who was serving as a soldier in the KARASUKI army, rose through the ranks, which granted him a practice match against GOUKI. The two engaged in an intense duel, and afterward, GOUKI couldn't help but admit that Zen was a very skilled fighter. GOUKI was so impressed by Zen's sword fighting and combat skills that he suggested that he become a guard of the KARASUKI royal family. After joining the royal guards, Zen met AYAME, and it's safe to say that was the beginning of their love story. Around that time, the KARASUKI kingdom signed a peace treaty with the Rokurin kingdom, which was supposed to finally bring peace between the two countries. However, during the signing of the peace treaty, the prince of the Rokurin kingdom took an interest in AYAME and ordered his attendant to kidnap her. Before the messenger could do this, however, Zen arrived just in time to knock him out and save AYAME. Unfortunately, Zen didn't just knock him out because he accidentally killed him with his attack. Soon enough, word got out, and the prince of Rokurin was so enraged that he ordered that Zen be executed immediately. He also took the opportunity to demand AYAME's hand in marriage as the only condition to keep the peace between the two nations. With no other choice, Zen and AYAME fled the kingdom together. As GOUKI concludes the story he was telling Ryo, he invites him to meet his grandparents, who are the current king and queen of KARASUKI Kingdom. The next day, Ryo goes to the royal palace and introduces himself to King Homura and Queen Shizuki, still a bit astonished that they are his grandparents. He then tells them the story of how AYAME was viciously murdered by a red-haired man named Lucius. Ryo recalls that Lucius was an adventurer who worked closely with his father Zen. He remembers his early childhood and how Lucius helped them a lot after his father's death, but suddenly attacked him one day and forced him to drink a strange potion. AYAME saw when this was happening, so she intervened to save Ryo, but got killed by Lucius, who had a sinister expression on his face the whole time. After that incident, Ryo's life changed forever because he found himself in the slums where he lived a horrible life until the day he came across Princess FLORA. Finishing his story, Ryo swears that he would one day avenge his mother, and the king supports him. To prepare Ryo for his quest, his grandfather first decides to test his strength by making him spar with GOUKI, who is KARASUKI's strongest warrior. With the king and queen seated, the sparring match between them begins in the courtyard. The two fight in an intense duel, and it initially appears that they're both evenly matched. However, GOUKI decides to take things up a notch. He gets serious and engulfs his sword with magic energy and hurls a powerful sword slash at Ryo. At this point, it seems like game over for the young man, but he manages to counter the mighty attack with a clever water spell and gets his sword to GOUKI's neck, which wins him the match. After the brilliant display, King Homura is impressed and immediately concludes that Ryo doesn't require any further training. Later that night, Ryo returns to the small village, and when he gets to Yuba's house, he tells RURI that they are cousins and that he's a prince of the KARASUKI kingdom. Ryo then reveals that he intends to leave the village in a year because he would like to return to the land where he grew up, but in the meantime, he would like to spend more time with them and the villagers. Over time, Ryo continues helping the villagers with farming, hunting, and anything he can be of assistance with. One day, while planting rice on the farm, Ryo tells Seo that he would embark on a journey soon, Once again, Ryo breaks another heart because Seo immediately starts crying and tries to hide it until Ruri interrupts them, which makes Ryo not notice the tears. Over the next 6 months, Seo practices her spirit arts every day, and when she feels confident enough, she takes Ryo into the forest for a private conversation. She confesses her love to him, but Ryo tells her that they can't be together because he has to leave the village soon. Desperate to be with him, Seo reveals that she's been practicing her spirit arts and claims that she's strong enough to join him on his journey. However, Ryo doesn't budge on his decision and apologizes to her before leaving her even more heartbroken than the first time. Sometime after that, Ryo is finally ready to leave the village. He says his goodbyes to Yuba, Ruri, and the villagers before setting off to continue his journey alone. As he leaves, Seo waits for him at the exit of the village and finally comes to terms with the fact that he's leaving. They both say their goodbyes and promise to meet each other again someday. Along the way, Ryo stops by the forest village. There he reunites with LATIFA and the other demi-humans. After receiving a very warm welcome, Ryo decides to stay in the village for a few months to everyone's delight. He comes up with an idea to build a house that he can travel with by keeping it in his space-time storage device. DOMINIC is pleased with the idea and offers to build the house for him. One day, Ryo wakes up to find a strange, naked, pink-haired girl lying with him in his bed. Ryo is startled, but the mysterious girl reveals that she's a spirit who made a contract with him, but doesn't remember how. Even worse, she doesn't know how they got separated and doesn't know her name as well. She tells him that all she knows is that exists for him and refers to him as Haruto as she communicates with him telepathically. After promising not to tell anyone about his past life, she asks Ryo to give her a name since she can't recall hers. The naked spirit girl finally creates a dress for herself using spirit magic, and as soon as Ryo sees her, he begins recalling memories of MIHARU, his childhood friend when he was Haruto. Suddenly, Ryo comes up with the name AISHA, which means beautiful springtime in the beast people's language. She accepts the name and then Ryo takes her to DRYAS, but the tree spirit has no idea why AISHA lost her memories. AISHA chimes in, revealing that she is excellent in all elements of spirit magic, which is extremely rare. To understand just how powerful AISHA is, Ryo decides to fight her. During the fight, Ryo uses all the skills and magical attacks he can come up with, but in the end, it appears that they're equally matched because she manages to counter every one of his attacks and mirrors his fighting techniques. After the fight, DRYAS decides to teach AISHA everything about spirits. Days pass after that, and AISHA gets used to life in the forest village. When DOMINIC finally completes Ryo's house, so Ryo reveals that he would be leaving the village in 2 days. Once again, before he leaves, the elders give him gifts, and this time, Ursula gives him a teleportation device so he can return to the village easily whenever he wants. DORA gives him earrings that he can use to change his hair color and disguise himself. After bidding everyone farewell, Ryo departs with AISHA. Before returning to the land where he grew up, Ryo takes a detour and decides to visit Seirei in the kingdom of BELTRUM. Arriving in the capital of the kingdom, Ryo changes the color of his hair so that nobody recognizes him. Now maintaining a low profile with his disguise, he and AISHA go to a bakery. Inside the bakery, Ryo and AISHA listen to some people and overhear the news of a noble's wedding parade the next day. Later that night, Ryo and AISHA go to the Royal Academy where Seirei teaches and stealthily sneak into the building. Inside, they manage to get past the guards undetected and make their way to Selei's lab. However, Ryo is shocked to find that the room is empty, unlike when he left it. Desperate to find answers, Ryo and AISHA leave the lab, and when they find some other teachers, AISHA uses her spirit magic to hypnotize one of them. Now under his spell, the man reveals that Seirei is getting married to Charles, the royal guard. Ryo also finds out that while he was away, the kingdom of BELTRUM suffered a huge defeat to the Praxia Empire. The hypnotized man rambles on and discloses that Charles started peace negotiations with the Praxia Empire because the royal family of BELTRUM lost its power. After the Huguenot family ran away from the capital, the House of ARBOR arranged a political marriage with the House of Claire as a means of securing more power. Hearing this, Ryo presumes that Seirei is being forced into the marriage with Charles, and so he decides to go and see her after leaving the Royal Academy. Meanwhile, in her room, Seirei has accepted her fate and is prepared to become Charles' property the moment they get married. As far as she's concerned, she doesn't have a choice, and so she's ready to go ahead with the marriage if it will protect her and her family. As she drinks tea, she looks into her drawer and stares at the letter Ryo sent a long time ago, wishing she could see him one more time because she still has feelings for him. Sneaking into the building, Ryo enters Selei's room and she's shocked to see him after so long. It's been 4 years since she saw him last, and so she's finding it difficult to keep her composure. However, Ryo is more concerned about something else. He goes straight to the point and asks her if she's honestly happy with the marriage arrangements with Charles. Although it's quite obvious she's lying, Seirei insists that she's happy with the arrangements and is prepared to go ahead with the marriage. It appears that Ryo sees through the facade because he senses something fishy, but before he can make his point, Seirei asks him to leave so that they don't get caught and cause any scandalous rumors or worse, get him in serious trouble. After he leaves the house, Celia locks herself in her room and bawls her eyes out. The following day, everyone gets prepared for the wedding, and Charles finally introduces Celia to his 6 other wives. The women mock her and inform her that she's going to be the lowest ranked among them. When Princess Christina arrives, she asks to speak with Celia in private and takes her away from the mean wives. Christina congratulates Celia on her wedding and hopes for the best. When Duke Huguenot fled the kingdom, he kidnapped Princess Flora and took her with him. This made the BELTRUM family lose respect and power, and now Christina feels responsible for Celia's forced marriage. Hoping to one day make things right, Christina vows to do anything she can to help Celia whenever she gets the chance. The wedding parade soon begins and a sea of people has gathered to watch. Hidden in the crowds are AISHA and Rio, who are still disguised. The wedding coach stops and Celia is about to get off it. As Charles stretches out his hand for her to take, Celia recalls her conversation with Rio the previous night. She remembers asking Rio if he was willing to marry her and ready to take her to a distant land where they'd be together. Celia is drawn out of her thoughts when Charles calls her name, urging her to take his outstretched hand. With a sigh of defeat, she takes the hand, believing that she is nothing more than a doll and would soon become Charles' property. Suddenly, they hear the guards shouting for someone to halt, and when Celia looks over, she realizes that it's Rio disguised, running toward the coach. The guards try to hold him back with a human blockade, but he easily breaks it by blasting them with a powerful wind attack. Next, the mage squad attempts to contain him by shooting him with photon bullets, but Rio dodges all the attacks and simply leaps over them. Rio finally gets to the coach, but then Charles' elite squad stands in his way. Celia gets worried, but Charles assures her that he's very confident in the squad and even refers to the incoming fight as a show before the ceremony. Charles is still bragging about the elite guards, but stops when he was that Rio is effortlessly defeating them. Still dazed by Rio's abilities, Charles just watches in awe and Rio lands a heavy punch in the gut when he's not expecting it. Charles falls unconscious after the blow, and then Rio grabs Celia and holds a knife to her neck in front of everyone watching. The people watch everything and become enraged, but Rio communicates with Celia telepathically. He tells her that it's him and assures her that he won't hurt her. Rio tells her that it's all an act and reveals that he knows she's not getting married at her own will. He then asks her again if she wants to proceed with the wedding. As he holds the knife against her neck, Rio remembers the memories of his mother and is determined not to stand by and lose someone important to him because he knows he'll regret it for the rest of his life. Initially, she's reluctant to respond, but Rio assures her that he can end the wedding immediately if she wants him to, and that he can even take her far away with him. Hearing these words makes Celia finally admit her true feelings and confesses that she wants him to end it and take her away. Without waiting any time, Rio tells Charles that he's kidnapping Celia and asks her to play along with his act. He then carries her in his arms and begins running away, but the guards and mages attack and pursue him. While running, Rio fights off all the guards, and when he realizes that the heat has become too much, he jumps down into a dark alley and hands Celia over to AISHA. He plans to serve as a distraction while the girls escape the royal capital together and meet up with him later at a rendezvous point. After going over the plan, the girls leave and Rio returns to the streets to battle it with all the guards. Even though it's an intense fight, Rio single-handedly takes on all of them while doing his best not to kill anyone. When it becomes clear that he's too powerful for the average guard, Alfred, the strongest knight in the kingdom, emerges from the crowds wielding a mighty sword. The two heavyweights clash swords in a fierce battle, and Rio notices that Alfred's sword is coated with magic. Although Alfred has the power hand, Rio still manages to block and dodge all his attacks. Alfred attempts to end the fight quickly by casting a spell on his sword, which he uses to power up his sword before unleashing a devastating attack on Rio. When the dust settles, Rio is nowhere to be found, so Alfred orders his men to search for him. Meanwhile, outside the capital, Rio meets up with the girls at the arranged location and Celia thanks him for saving her. A thunderstorm is brewing and suddenly, huge beams of magical light running from the sky down to the ground start appearing all over the land. AISHA immediately senses that something is wrong and tells Rio that he must help someone in need. Elsewhere, a boy and two girls get themselves lost. They're then kidnapped and taken to another world by some bandits, but Rio appears and saves them. In an interesting twist, one of the people he saved turns out to be MIHARU, but she doesn't recognize him.